It's been a wild ride the last couple of days, but here we are. I'm Chris Irons, former Commissioner for Body Corporate and Community Management, Strata Advisor with Hines Legals. With me, as always, Frank Higginson, partner Hines Legal. Frank, welcome.
Thank you. You do say as always as if I'm always here when sometimes I'm not.
We resolve never to speak of that again.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Not only is today lockdown-free Thursday, but it's also the 1st of April, which means that we start the new cycle of webinars. And hopefully, if you have subscribed to us, you would have received your webinar topics for this month. We have 5 webinars this month. 5 Thursdays equals 5 webinars. We have a jam-packed schedule of content. If you sign up for those 2, you also get the links to the last month's webinars, and you also get Frank's wrap-up of the month that has been, which is no bad thing, I think. Frank, I know you spend days and days at a time writing that, so you really should subscribe to that, everyone. No, but seriously, it's a really good resource, that one. So please make sure that you do. Stay tuned for all of this month's webinars. Again, if you sign up, that's how you get reminders, and you also get a little bit of content from us afterwards. So another incentive to sign up. Today, though, we're going to talk about the thorny topic of committees. Now, Frank, can you remember where this one came up?
Absolutely. When we were bouncing around talking to everyone about what was coming with the new regulation modules, to be honest, not a lot of the things changed with respect to committee membership and eligibility and removal, which we're really talking about today. But those were a lot of the questions that we wore from people. Nothing's changed, here's the deal on this. Nothing's changed, here's the deal on this. So, but why not? Obviously, topic near and dear to people's hearts, so let's give it a crack.
Absolutely. So it's getting on and getting off committees. We've got a bit to cover today, so look, let's rip into it. And look, it's always good to start with a bit of a basic clarification, Frank. We're talking about committees. So committees is the smaller subset of all of the owners in a body corporate. Committee has the day-to-day decision-making responsibility. So that's what we're not talking about general meetings, we're talking about committees today. And as we just said, Frank, being on the committee can, well, pretty much in every case, comes with a lot of responsibility, but there's also a fair bit of power involved in being on a committee, isn't there?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got the ability to make decisions around a whole bunch of things. And one of the things that always comes with committee membership is volunteering. You know, I suppose the analogy that I use for committees more than anything else is it's like a company. You know, if you've got a listed company, you've got all of the shareholders, which in effect are the owners. The committee is the board of directors of the body corporate. So, and those people as volunteers don't necessarily have as high a standard as what you might have as if you're a director of BHP in terms of corporate governance. And that's to the extent there is a higher standard, people might not be committee members. So part of what these things are all about is probably giving committee members who are volunteers some guidance around what they could and shouldn't be doing, because we see a lot of committees do things they shouldn't be doing.
That's right. And the flip side of that, Frank, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what a committee does and what they should and shouldn't be doing. And I guess what that leads to is that in some buildings, being on or being off a committee is a very intense battle. There was one committee situation that made the front page of one of the papers here just this week past about a fight for committee power and control at that particular building. That's a big building with a lot of money and a lot of contracts in prime position. It's little wonder it was so tightly contested. Before we rip into that, why don't we start with a bit of reality checking, Frank? I always like checking reality. Yep. Always.
Absolutely.
So first up, if you're an owner, you don't have a God-given right to be on the committee.
No, you're there at the will of the people.
Yep.
And that's what it is. You know what I mean? It's a very strange democracy, the body corporate one, and it isn't dissimilar in a sense to what we have every 3 or 4 years with local, state, and federal elections. The difference is that at body corporate level, there's no compulsory voting.
That's right.
So people can choose to vote. So that then comes down to rustling up numbers and all the rest of it. But just because you put your hand up doesn't mean you've got the right to be there.
Doesn't matter who you are either. I've encountered plenty of people who felt that they should be on the committee because of either what they knew or their expertise or their background, because they've been there for a long time. No, all of that may be useful in making a case for you being on the committee, but none of it entitles you to committee membership. Which then leads me to my second reality testing, and I dare say some people will not like me saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you think you should be on a committee, but you're not, maybe you should be asking yourself why you haven't made it onto the committee, Frank.
Absolutely. Sometimes that's a good hard look in the mirror, as brutal as that might be. And even had a conversation with a client this week who was unhappy with what the committee was doing. Committee's only 4 people. This has been going on forever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you put your hand up to be involved, no. So how long have these guys been there? 4 or 5 years. So why are they going to suddenly change their ways to suit what you want, as opposed to you getting involved and making something happen? That is also the nature of this body corporate democracy, the oversight. And this is, I suppose, Chris, one of the things you always used to say as commissioner, there's no such thing as the body corporate police to run around and belt people that are doing the wrong thing in strata land. It's very much a self-governance. And in a sense, if the tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, doesn't make a noise. That's the same thing with body corporate. If you want something to happen, you've got to get involved. But if you haven't been invited to participate for some reason,
absolutely,
maybe
Frank.
that's what the owners don't want you to.
Yeah, sometimes you have to pay attention to the numbers. I should point out too, if you've got questions on this one, just pop them into the chat box there on YouTube. We'll try and answer as many of those as we can as we go along. The next reality check, it's perfectly fine to lobby to be on the committee. There seems to be this misconception out there that, oh, no, you can't go and door knock and you can't suggest to your fellow voters that they should vote for you. No, that's fine, isn't it, Frank?
It is, and you can also suggest to people that they don't vote for someone. And now, with the new regime and body corporate email address, well, email addresses forming part of the body corporate role officially, everyone's contact details are available to every other owner for those purposes. So haven't actually, I suppose, had our first round of questions yet about that sort of stuff, but inevitably in the next 6 to 12 months we'll get it. You're entitled to put a view forward. Ideally, that's not a view that involves defamatory material, but if it's an honestly held opinion, keep the lawyers out of it. But I think I'm a better person for the job than Chris because of this. I don't think Chris should get the job because of this.
Yep.
Illegitimate statements of opinion.
Absolutely,
and it goes on. I mean, the best one I've seen was an A3 glossy, which was printed front page, middle, other middle, back, folded, so it was like a 4-page pamphlet, went under every person's door. This is the committee that you should be voting for, and this is why. So it would have cost them proper money to do it, but completely legitimate.
Worth it, yeah. I have lost count of the number of times people have approached me either as commissioner or in this role, Frank, and they begin with, how do we remove the committee? How do we get rid of them? Or the committee is awful. How do we remove them? Once you start talking to them, though, you realise the problem is a lot more specific than that. So I guess the next reality check is removing the committee either in its entirety or individual members is rarely the answer to a problem in a body corporate, isn't it, Frank?
Yeah, because sometimes it can alienate people and then they throw stones at you from the other side if you're successful in doing so. But by the same token, definitely have seen some people removed who you might qualify as problem children in a body corporate, and the next thing they do, they're selling their lot and going. They don't need the public shame of having been removed by the owners in general meeting, and they just go. It's a really interesting sort of psychological thing.
We also, another reality checking point that we'd like to address is that, again, we hear this all the time, a complaint that, the committee is just stacked with the chairman's mates. That's really unfair. Well, if you were chairman, you'd want people on your side, wouldn't you? I'd
rather work with a bunch of mates than people I don't like.
That's right. So, I mean, the point is, if there, complaints about voting blocks and favouritism and all the rest of it, unless there's been some actual illegality or irregularity with the voting process, that's fine too, isn't it, Frank?
It is. And I mean, the anecdote that, I like reading a lot of political books, read Malcolm Turnbull's autobiography recently, so as self-serving as some of that might have been, there was an anecdote at the end that I really liked. He said, in terms of business, you pick the people you want to be in business with. In terms of politics, you have the people you're in business with thrust upon you by the electorate, and you might or might not like them. So in a body corporate context, as much as we're saying it's sort of the will of the people, sometimes because of the, I suppose, the non-compulsory nature of the voting, you can stack committees to be all aligned towards a particular purpose, and that happens a lot. And if that's the will of the people, that's the will of the people.
That's right. Which then leads to our next reality checking. Body corporate world is just like politics. You've got to have the numbers. So same thing here. If you want to change a committee or you want to get yourself elected onto the committee, you've got to have the numbers to do it. If you don't have the numbers, you don't pass. Sorry, that's just how it goes. Australian politics is filled with stories about people who either did not count the numbers correctly or just who could not count the numbers at all. Same thing here. Pointless putting yourself up if you don't have support.
No, absolutely. And I suppose the last one that I like using a lot, the world's run by those who show up. And in Strata land with apathy and all that sort of stuff, that is very true a lot of the time. Obviously, there's some very engaged communities where committee membership is sought after and you might have 14 nominations. By and large, I'd say the bulk of the 50,000 Strata schemes in Queensland, and I suppose we've got a lot of smaller ones in there, Chris, the committee wouldn't be contested at all. I'd say probably, I don't know, 46, 47,000 of those wouldn't be a committee ballot at all, maybe even more. So put your hand up, get involved, you're there.
So that's the reality checking. So let's talk about the crucial issue when it comes to getting on committee, and that is being eligible to be on the committee. So if you're an owner in a lot, that's the first step of eligibility, isn't it? You're an owner, you're in a lot, and that you don't owe a debt for that matter. So that's the first level of eligibility. Then, Frank, there's a next level, isn't there?
There is. And I suppose where, to me, the government's got to with this is they really want people to be able to participate in the management of their body corporate affairs. So when you look at the other criteria for eligibility, effectively, if you're an owner, any family member of yours is entitled to nominate for committee, straight up. So my son, my daughter, my father, my brother can go on to be my representative. Companies who own lots, in a sense, companies can't be on committee in their own right, but companies in a body corporate nation, that's not the right word, lost it there anyway, in a body corporate sense, speak through their corporate nominee. So companies appoint a corporate nominee, and that's the person who can go on committee, vote, and otherwise for bodies corporates. You've got powers of attorney. So for example, Chris could be a power of attorney for someone who wanted him to be on their committee and represent their interests. And I suppose, so that really, it opens the door to almost anyone an owner wants to represent them, other than a few sort of specific criteria, Christopher.
Yeah, and that's effectively if you are an associate of one of the contractors associated with the body corporate. So associate of caretaking service contractor, associate of a letting agent, associate of a body corporate manager, associate of somebody running a letting business in the scheme. They are all ineligible to be on the committee. Here's a fun fact for you. We can actually be your representative on the committee, can't we, Frank?
We can.
Yes,
and I've seen it happen a couple of times. Yeah, absolutely, for a fee. But yeah, but no, in terms of corporate governance, I mean, who better to have the former commissioner there to manage it?
Yep.
But anyway, so eligibility, it's almost anyone other than those very specific criteria. Associates of specific contractors, or if you're unfinancial. Other than that, it's almost a free-for-all.
The really good illustration of eligibility, Frank, comes in again in federal politics when you had that huge kerfuffle a couple of years ago about citizenship and all of that sort of business, which then started to rule out people left, right, and centre. And the threshold question was, well, that person should never have been eligible for Parliament anyway because of X, Y, and Z. Same thing that we're talking about here. Eligibility, it doesn't mean that you're automatically on the committee. It means you are eligible to be on the committee. And we're almost halfway through, Frank, and we only have started to get to getting on committees. So wild suggestion, How about we devote the rest of this webinar to getting on committees with a bit of best practice, and then we'll reserve getting off committees for a part 2. Doable?
Righto. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Well, there's a bunch of, yep. So everyone, removing committee members, let's do first up next month maybe. We haven't got to next month's catalogue yet, but that'll do. And finish with, because there's still a bunch of, getting on.
Yep.
So.
But if you've got a burning question today about removal or getting off a committee, chuck it in. We'll do our best to answer it. So getting on committees, the most straightforward, obvious way of getting on a committee is you get elected. Seems reasonable enough. Elections happen at every annual general meeting. So there's no holding over, and Frank, it's always the last item on the AGM, isn't it?
It is. And so if you're a lot owner, your body corporate manager will fire.
Why is that, Frank?
Because it lets the current committee finish the meeting which they started. Yep. So the chairperson of the AGM is the chairperson who was elected at the previous year's AGM. So they filter all the way through, and then we have the election for the new committee members as we go.
So and there's a don't they?
They do. And there's a reminder. So 6 weeks before the end of your body corporate's financial year, your body corporate manager should fire at you. Do you want to submit motions? Here's your invitation. Do you want to nominate for committee? Here's your invitation. So as long as you fire that back in by the end of the body corporate's financial year, then you're on the agenda. So if no one else nominates for the position you've nominated for, chair, secretary, treasurer, or otherwise, you're it. If there is a contested nomination, then it's down to a ballot.
That's right. So it's the last item. So a reminder that because it's the last item, all committee positions are rendered vacant at that point. So right up until the point of the election, the current committee is responsible for managing that AGM and effectively managing everything that goes on at the body corporate up until that last item when everything is thrown open. So I've seen a number of people want to put a motion on an AGM that blah, blah committee member be removed. Well, it's entirely pointless to do that because they're going to get removed anyway at the end of the meeting. Time. Yep. Yeah. And in fact, I would suggest it's actually out of order to do that anyway, because that motion cannot be given effect. That's my view anyway. So yeah, there's no point demanding that somebody resign at an AGM because their position is going to be rendered vacant at the time of the election anyway. Which leads us to thinking about what an election is all about, Frank. It's all about you put yourself up to be subjected to the will of the people, don't you?
You do. And you get to talk to people. I suppose, it's always interesting that at AGMs in terms of whether the existing committee or chairperson really who's in charge of the meeting will allow people to talk to their nomination or otherwise. I think for me, no hard and fast rules on that. I think the best one is that whatever rule or whatever the chairperson decides should be consistently applied across all of the candidates. So I think that's acting reasonably. And the other thing I think that's really interesting in these ones is you can nominate for as many positions as you like. So I think one of the tricks from a committee perspective is if you really do want to get on the committee and you're not sure what's actually going to happen, it's a matter of nominating for chairperson, secretary, treasurer, and ordinary. Because the way the module works, which has always been the way, is that when you do get to that election of committees, the module actually sets out the order of which those positions must be decided. So chair, secretary, treasurer, and then the ordinary position. So what can happen is if you really desperately want to be on and you nominate for just chairperson and you lose, but there's positions available for secretary, treasurer, and I suppose, well, Chris, and now we've got the new modules. So we'll get to that in a second. But if you nominate for one spot and all of the other spots are effectively taken, then you're not going to get on. If you nominate for all of the spots, the moment you're elected to chair, for example, you can withdraw your nominations for secretary, treasurer, and you're automatically not then going to get on as ordinary, which means you've got your gig. But otherwise, you can keep filtering down.
That's right. We're just putting a link up now on the YouTube page about an article that we've previously written about different body corporate roles. So while we're on the subject, Rebecca, thanks for your question. We'll get to that towards the end of this session, if that's okay with you. But thank you. I can see it there. We will get to that one. So that's election. Now let's talk about appointment. This is an entirely different scenario. This is an appointment to fill what's called a casual vacancy. So whatever committee, and this, Rebecca, goes towards your question, whatever committee is elected at the AGM, those numbers must be maintained to the next AGM. So what does that mean, Frank? If somebody, if there's a change, what happens then?
The committee's got to fill it. End of story. The committee must fill it. So, and I think one of the big things here that comes up quite a lot is how is that actually filled? This is the question we cop quite a lot. And the answer is really subject to, I suppose, there's a link to an article we can put up in a minute. It's up to what the committee decides. They've got to fill the spot, but who they fill it from, absent some direction in general meeting saying this is what you've got to do, is up to them. So again, I suppose this is back to what you were saying before, Chris, in terms of the stacking of committee with mates and all that sort of thing. Clearly, the committee is more than likely, particularly in a scheme that has engagement, going to pick people that are consistent with what their particular view of the world in that body corporate is. And there's nothing anyone can do about that.
Well, and we hear it, I mean, I know you and I have heard this a lot, that when it comes to filling a casual vacancy, one of the arguments is, well, I was next up on the list of nominees at the AGM, so I should be picked. And I wasn't, and that's really unfair. Doesn't work like that. Yes, okay, I can accept that if you've put your hand up, then it makes sense to ask you to be involved, but you don't have to. And that article Frank was just talking about, we've just popped up there. If it's good enough for the Senate,
that article, and that article was interesting in the sense of that body corporate had made a specific decision, is that if there is a casual vacancy, then the person who the next most votes is the one that replaces it, and that's fine. So that then, in effect, took it out of the committee's hands because the owners in general meeting said, this is what's going to happen. Absent something like that, it's completely up to the committee.
That's right. So let's actually address, well, no, actually, I'll get to your question in a minute, Rebecca, but I was just going to finish off that point. If it's good enough for the Senate of Australia to fill a casual vacancy like that, so when a senator dies or resigns or is evicted due to a sex scandal or something like that, not that that ever happens, they don't go and they don't go to another election to elect a senator. It's someone's picked, yeah, that's just how it is. And why is that? Well, because it would cost a lot of money and take up a lot of time to have to hold fresh elections every time. And you think about it in a body corporate, if you've got 100 lots in your building and a 7-person committee, and then, you know, normal course of sales, just purely a person selling the lot, that might happen half a dozen times a year, if not more. Do you really want that many elections in the course of a year, or that many consultative processes? No, no. The flip side, though, Frank, no, that's right. The flip side of it, though, Frank, effectively, is it means that those in control, they get to stay in control.
There it is.
Seems unfair. That's the way it is. So, Rebecca, your question, if a person holds chairperson and secretary positions and resigns, can the positions be filled by 2 separate people moving forward? I don't think they can. It's about maintaining numbers, isn't it, Frank?
I think so too. I've got to say, I've never had that question before, but my gut feel would be, and we might confirm this and put it up as a link afterwards, is if there's 6 voting members of that committee, there must remain 6 voting members of that committee throughout the course of that year. So effectively what that to me would say is that someone's got to put their hand up to be chair and secretary.
Or, or there's got to be a shuffling around of the other positions to accommodate for that. But yeah, Rebecca, on face value, I don't think that that can happen, but we'll double check that and come back to you. In the short time we've got left, we just want to cover off, gosh, this is really flying today. Let's cover off a few other scenarios about being on committees. So one that comes up all the time, can a person hold more than 1 executive position? They sure can. They can hold all 3 if they want. What about independent committee members, Frank? Like an independent board member?
To be honest, I think there's some merit in this, and I know when they put out the discussion paper, there was a question asked at the back end of it. So again, Chris, that might be a link to stick up there somewhere. But I think it's a function of cost and a function of governance, because you do look at some of the very big buildings, they are assets worth hundreds of millions with hundreds, maybe thousands of occupants, run by a group of volunteers arguing over their personal fiefdoms. So sometimes, to a degree, a little bit of expert, independent voice in there might not be a bad thing, but it comes at a cost. So I think at this point in time, government hasn't mandated it, as much as in theory a body corporate could encourage it, but very rarely see it.
That's right.
Never see it, actually. Take that back.
No, yeah. And my favourite kind of last other scenario to talk about, Frank, we often hear this one too about how, that person on the committee, they're just a puppet for somebody else making all the decisions in the background. And of course, when I hear this, I think of that classic Seinfeld episode where Kramer was acting as a puppet chairperson for Jerry's father, who for various reasons was not allowed or even considered to be on the condo committee. That too is okay. Is it ideal? Probably not. I could actually think of some instances where it probably is ideal, depending upon who's involved. But no, that's okay. If you've got a chairperson who doesn't do anything other than cast votes and takes all of their substantial information and knowledge from somebody else, so be it.
The way it is.
Yep. Lucy, we'll try your question before we get into a few best practice, and this is more about getting off committee, but we'll answer it because you've asked it. Is there a time frame to accept an ordinary member resignation? I don't think there is, Frank, is there?
Well, I think it's a bit of a furphy to suggest that it must be accepted. You know, I suppose maybe we're going back to the political dramas and employment dramas in the sense of Chris resigns. Chris, I'm not going to accept that resignation. Same body corporate, there's no choice. Once someone resigns, to me, out. So in a sense, it's like if I fire my email into the committee to say, you know what, I'm resigning forthwith, that's it. Doesn't need to be accepted, doesn't need to wait 21 days, doesn't need to go to all of the other owners. That person's gone, which triggers the obligation of the committee to fill that casual vacancy straight away.
Yeah. Feasibly, Lucy, there could be a scenario in which the person says, look, I have to resign for these reasons, but I'll hang on that'll take effect in 3 weeks so I can help us, do the agenda for the next meeting or something like that. Feasibly, that could happen. But we'll get more onto that in the part B of this webinar. Best practice. Frank, I don't like my committee. What can I do about it?
And do something about it by nominating yourself, talking to other people about nominating as a group, or sell your unit. Yep. Or take yourself off all body corporate communications. Just shut down, lock yourself in your little box, go into lockdown, and ignore everything that goes on. Yep. That's it. There's no other solutions other than those for me. So it's and if nothing changes, nothing changes.
All right, another one. So you think you or somebody else should be on the committee? What do we do about it?
Lobby, talk, engage, communicate, nominate, talk to the existing committee. There might be someone in the existing committee who's quite happy to put their hand up and resign. I've had enough. Okay, well then, Chris, on you come. You're the casual vacancy that we've been looking for to fill.
And I would suggest, I'd go a step further, Frank, and say lobby positively. Lobby is not about dissing your opponents constantly. Lobbying can actually be about touting yourself and who you are in a very positive way. So more flies with honey, I reckon. And also don't forget, the word committee literally means one who commits. So don't be on the committee, or don't think about being on the committee unless you're prepared to put in the work for it. That's it in a nutshell. And one of our favourites, Frank, we sort of talked about this before, about the source of this. Use your power wisely if you're on a committee. With great power comes great responsibility, said Spider-Man. Or no, it was Uncle Spider-Man, wasn't it?
I don't know. I'm not a Spider-Man fan, but see, I'm more Orwellian, so I've sort of got the 4 legs, the uncle. 2 legs better.
Yeah.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
It's a fair point, though, isn't it? I mean, we see it so often, don't we, that people with the best of intentions on a committee, after a period of time, through various reasons, have found that their best intentions have evaporated.
It is, and some of that niggle sometimes gets a little bit personal. You know what I mean? It's sort of helping one committee at the moment who are dealing with some owners who to be honest, have probably got some reasonably held views about how certain things should have happened that might not have happened the correct way. And so getting that committee to, in a sense, acknowledge that these concerns might be genuine without, effectively throwing themselves under the bus and admitting they got it wrong is one of the balancing points. Because I know if we go to adjudication, we're going to get belted. So we've got to just calm it down. And that personality issue is the biggest issue in this building. I don't want to admit I'm wrong. I can't let these guys get one up on me, but it's like, mate, you're going to have to.
Yep.
And that's where the fight starts.
Absolutely, Frank. And there's one more question there before we finish up. Thank you, Sandra. Can a non-subsidiary nominee present at an AGM whose representative is present nominate from the floor for executive positions?
A non-subsidiary nominee. So I'm assuming we've got a layered scheme, we've got a principal body corporate, and we've got some subsidiaries. I suppose there's two things in here. There's the corporate governance at subsidiary level. So from a subsidiary perspective, where's the decision that nominates that person, or that says that that person is the one who's going to be able to nominate to go on the committee? Because normally what you've got is the subsidiary, and I think the legislation's silent on this in terms of the default position. If a subsidiary body corporate is a member of a principal body corporate, which I suppose by definition it has to be, so forgive me for that, normally it defaults to be the chairperson, but it's absolutely open to the subsidiary body corporate to nominate anyone to go on that gig. So I think the starting point is from subsidiary level, on what basis are you nominating? And then at principal body corporate level, I think you've almost got to come back to, at this point in time, how many people have nominated and whether all of those positions have been filled, and what happens if there's a conflict between the two. It's sort of, there's a few moving
Frank,
parts to that one, Sandra. Yeah.
There could be 12 people on the committee for PBC now as well.
Assuming we get that resolution at the first instance, yes,
so
coming forward.
So that's to consider as well. Yep.
Not as absolute as I might like to be, Sandra, but I think there's a couple of moving parts there at PBC level to check out.
That's a bit
before
in
I give
that
you a black
one,
and white
isn't
answer.
there? And then Mr. SMB, thank you, Mr. SMB. I'm not really sure if this is a question or a comment or in response to one of the other questions. Chair required to call for nominations from the floor for a fifth ordinary member if somebody is elected to 2 exec positions. The threshold there is whether or not you have reached the maximum number. And the maximum number would be 7 unless it's under 7 lots. So if you've filled your executive position, then yes, you continue to call from the floor until it's exhausted, up to the 7. I think that's right, isn't it, Frank? Yeah, that's right.
I don't know. It's just sort of I suspect so, mate. You've probably answered that question a lot as Commissioner.
Yeah. So basically, you filled your executive positions. You are over the minimum of 3. At that point, you must continue to call, and you keep calling it until either you filled it to 7 or there's no more interest. One or the other. Yeah. We have reached the end of time, Frank. Well, the end of this time anyway, not the end of time literally, but yeah.
Getting off and removing committees probably got more content to it. So first one in May, ladies and gentlemen, we'll absolutely do removals, resignations, departures.
And if I had to take a wild guess, I would suggest that most people would want to know about the getting off committees and removing people from them. So, yeah, we'll cover that one in May, everybody. Thank you today. Some really good input and questions today, as always. Again, don't forget to subscribe so you can get notified of these and get reminders and get content. For now, though, Frank, thank you.
Thank you, Rowan. Have a safe Easter. Yeah. I suppose if you're travelling post-lockdown,
good luck.
Do it safely. Yeah. Roads might be a bit diabolical, let alone with the weather. So yeah, have a good one, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Don't forget your mask. We'll see you next week. Bye.